4th unit. In this unit, we're going to talk about cells and all the things that make up cells, basically cell structure and function. So in this unit, we will be talking about cells. Where we're going to start today is we're going to start with just a basic overview on cells. So we're not going to get too in detail, but we want to talk about their discovery and just some major parts about cells. So, to begin, what is a cell? Well, the cell is the smallest unit of living matter, which means that anything smaller than a cell we don't consider living. So the next smallest thing other than a cell would be a virus, and technically as a scientist we do not consider viruses living. Once we start to get bigger living things, they're actually not comprised of one cell, but they're comprised of many cells, so they become multicellular. But that single-celled organism is the smallest thing that we know of that can be living. Okay, so smallest unit of living matter. A couple of cell scientists. I want to talk about some of the scientists that helped discover cells and helped get cells to where they are today. And the first one is Antoine van Leeuwenhoek. And Antoine van Leeuwenhoek is known for being the first scientist to observe living cells. So he observed tiny unicellular living things that have never been seen before. And he's accredited for the first one seeing living cells. Another scientist that's really important to cell science is a guy named Robert Hooke. And Robert Hooke actually had a big part in developing the compound microscope. So here's a compound microscope that Robert Hooke had. And here are some of our technical transmission electron and scanning electron microscopes up here. And what Robert Hooke did is Robert Hooke looked at a bunch of cork cells. And cork is a type of plant. So down here you notice that there's a bunch of cork cells. And he said that they looked like little rooms in a monastery. And those rooms in a monastery were called cellulae. And so Robert Hooke is sort of accredited for naming cells. So he's the first one to call these little structures cells because he looked at cork and he thought they looked like the rooms in a monastery. Now, a couple other scientists that are important to us as biologists is this guy named Theodore Schwann. And Theodore Schwann looked at animal cells primarily, so he looked at cells of animals. And he came up with this important idea that he found out that no matter what animal he observed, he found out that they are all made of cells. So every animal is made of cells. So that was sort of Schwann's big contribution. And another guy, Schleiden, had sort of the same contribution, except for he looked at plants. And he looked at all these living organisms, all these plants, and he concluded that all plants are made of cells. So these two scientists, along with other scientists, they came together and they started to develop this thing called cell theory. So because of these great discoveries of cells and the idea that all plants and all animals are made of cells, and then we built on from that, and then we came up with what's called cell theory. And this is our current theory of cells today, and it has some parts to it. The first part, or part one, is that all organisms are made of cells, and a cell is the structure and functional unit of organs and ultimately organisms. And that second part down here, and I'm just going to bring out my pen, this second part here is kind of confusing. And what they mean by that is this. They mean that cells are the structure and functional unit of organs. So for instance, if we look at a heart, and I know hearts don't look like this, but if we look at a heart, so here's your heart. A heart works the way it works because cells make it work. So a cell is what's actually making the heart work. So it has its function, it works the way it works because of cells, and also it has its structure. It is made up completely of cells. So all organs are made up of cells, and all organs work because cells are doing the work. So that's a really important concept. And the second part is this. Cells are capable of self-reproduction, and cells only come from pre-existing cells. There was a time back in the day when they believed in what's called the spontaneous generation of life, and that life spontaneously generated out of nothing, and a bunch of scientists did a bunch of work to disprove that, and now we no longer believe that in this spontaneous generation model, we know that cells have to come from other cells. Okay, another last important concept that I want to talk about is cell size. So how big are cells? Now, if you think about all these little organisms living in the water, you would think that we have a single-celled organism, and you would think that a bigger single-celled organism would be better, because the bigger single-celled organism could eat the littler single-celled organism. So therefore, a bigger single-celled organism would be better, or more advantageous. And then even more so, a bigger single-sized organism would be more advantageous because it would be able to eat the even smaller one. So you would think that cells should, if we're going to be more advantageous, they should increase in size. Cells should increase in size. But we don't see that. We see that cells have remained small and not gotten big. So there has to be a reason for that. And this reason is a really important concept in biology. So cell size is extremely important. You'll have to read behind my drawing. Cell size is extremely important to living things. Cells have not increased in size for a reason, and the reason is this. If we look at this block here, this block has both a volume, so it has the amount of space it takes up, and it has a surface area, right? So it has an amount of area covering the surface of this thing. So if we take up the area of all 6 sides, and then we multiply it by 6, we'd get a surface area. And then if you take length times width times height, we'd get a volume. Right? Well, it has a surface area and volume. Well, the important thing is that smaller cells down here have a larger surface area to volume ratio. So their surface area is larger relative to their volume, and that's an important concept. And I'm actually gonna prove that to you in lab. So, oops, we'll go back here. So, smaller cells are more advantageous because they have a larger surface area relative to their volume, where the larger ones have a larger total surface area, but relative to their volume, it's way smaller. And cells have to do everything through their membrane, through the little covering on the outside. And so, the more surface area or more membrane related to the volume, the more advantageous or effective that cell is going to be. And we'll actually prove that in lab to you this week. So if you have any questions, class, feel free to ask me anytime. Have a good day.